Hey everyone, welcome back to the PAC-South podcast. We are back once again after a small little hiatus. Got going into some NHL playoffs and got out of some NHL playoffs. Pat's still alive. We have lots of good sports going on, but obviously we are here for the college sports. And if you follow us on Instagram, today we just posted our mid-major final rankings. Those have finally come out. And Pat, I'm going to pass this over to you with your mid-major knowledge. Really fun to see these finally come out. Again, a reminder for everyone: Gonzaga not on the list for a mid-major. That is just a really good team. Period. So we exclude them, although they may or may not have been number one regardless. We don't know necessarily, but I will pass it over to you to really dive into those rankings.
Yeah, and I know, like you said, we tend to keep Gonzaga out, but all of the other WAC teams, so Santa Clara, St. Mary's, who had really nice seasons, were featured. San Francisco had a chance to kind of be on there if they had, let's say, closed the season a little stronger, maybe made a better push for the NCAA tournament. But yeah, if you guys follow us on Instagram, you may have seen it up already. But we kind of tried to take into account both, I'll say, like how you performed in the regular season in your conference tournament. And then, of course, if you had positive NCAA tournament results. So St. Louis led the pack for us just because of their consistency this year in the A10. Of course, they didn't end A10 play probably the way they wanted to, but they had a big first round win in the NCAA tournament, played really, really close against a Michigan team that wound up winning the national championship. So I think that's what really pushed them over for me and put them into that number one spot. And then, maybe a little surprising to have a team like High Point ranked ahead of Miami, Ohio after such a good regular season from Miami, Ohio. But again, we want to reward tournament performance. And while Miami, Ohio got a play-in win, High Point did get that actual in-tournament win over Wisconsin and then played decently close against a pretty good Arkansas team.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously you looking at it, you round out that top 10. Tulsa at 9, New Mexico at 10, directly in on the semifinal results there. Nice to see teams like that kind of get rewarded as well. I mean, you see Utah State, great Mountain West team this year. New Mexico just kind of falling apart there toward the end of conference play there. They just could not get past Utah State, Boise State, and obviously not on this list. They kind of had a down year for that program in Colorado State. Just kind of the Mountain West really ate them a bit. Interesting to see a team like Wichita State be as low as they are. Kind of not really talked about that much, but I feel like the conversation needs to be had a little bit. Wichita State, since moving to the American Conference, has kind of seen a step back in athletics. Do you think that this is a long-term issue for the Shockers, or is this just a quick transition?
I think it's more of a transitional problem right now. I don't want to say that this is like a program killer or something like that, because they were a few games away from the NCAA tournament this year, right? It's not like they were some kind of crummy team that didn't really have a legitimate shot. They could have been the representative for the American in the NCAA tournament had they played a little bit better in conference tournament play. And then they played pretty well in the NIT, so it's not like they're totally dead in the water, let's say. But I definitely think there have been some growing pains for Wichita State. It has not been the smoothest of transitions. Obviously, the whole Greg Marshall firing wasn't great when it happened. And then trying to get those pieces into place, right, to transition into a new era, transition into, let's say, like higher level play. Didn't exactly start super strong, but I could definitely see this being a team that makes the NCAA tournament next year, especially with South Florida being such a big question mark, losing their coach. Tulsa's had some guys transfer out in the portal, so you never know. The Shockers could be back where we like to see them and where March Madness fans will remember them next season.
for sure. And a team that I think has a chance to make the dance next year based on their conference and based on kind of how that program has seemingly grown over the past few years. Curious to know your thoughts on Troy. It seems like the Sunbelt Conference is a conference that never really solidifies itself in a program each and every year. It's kind of wide open. I like the Trojans to kind of start to actually do that now. It seems
Yeah.
like, yeah, they still have some step back seasons, but they're not as volatile as some of these others may be. Do you think that we can see the Trojans next year in the dance?
Yeah, I definitely could see that. They've been really consistent in conference tournament play over the past 2 seasons. Um, and like you said, the Sun Belt is getting better, right? I mean, like Marshall was a pretty decent team this year in comparison with the rest of the conference, let's say. And also, Arkansas State is kind of one of those up and down programs where they're a little hard to
Yeah.
figure out. They'll have some pretty solid like competitive years where they're right on the verge of tournament contention, and then they'll kind of just disappear for a little while. So I think
Hmm.
they're a team to keep an eye on a little bit if the Red Wolves decide to funnel some more money into basketball. Um, but yeah, Troy is definitely cementing itself as a pretty strong, let's say, like member or powerhouse of the Sun Belt, and it'd be kind of fun if we could see Troy football make that same type of resurgence and same type of revival. They had some really good years under John Sumrall just a few seasons ago. So who knows? Maybe Troy football and basketball can start, say, joint running the Sun Belt West again.
Yeah. Yeah. The only conference that still has divisions. I
Hmm.
want to give a big shout out to the Sun Belt for not removing them, albeit probably yet. But it's still great to still have divisions in some of those. It creates different dynamics. And yeah, you want a conference title to be the best two teams. However, you can also still have the best two teams duking it out in division play just the same. So there is our kind of bookend for college basketball this year, our mid-major. Again, shout out the Billikens of St. Louis for taking home our, I guess, mid-major national title this season. And then we'll now go ahead and start kind of turning the page to next year in football. Spring football is happening right now, and for some camps, it's kind of already wrapped up. We've been hearing a lot of news about transfer portal. We've been hearing a bunch about just players in general, it seems like this year. Want to start with a program, though. Lots on the coach, lots on the money being spent. Is LSU our clear cut number one team in the nation going into the season?
I feel like it's still early to make that call, Obviously, like you said, they've heavily invested in the program, obviously heavily invested in Lane Kiffin. But I mean, we're still in May, and we're still seeing some of these teams do spring games. Some programs like South Carolina kind of doing away with the spring game a little bit and doing, let's say, like practice and festivities instead. Um, I don't know. I think LSU is obviously going to be really, really good, but to crown them the de facto number one, I think that might be a little premature. And maybe we want to consider Ohio State for that mark. I'm sure in the rankings, just because oftentimes the reigning national champion doesn't exactly get disrespected, we might see Indiana occupy that spot. But I definitely think this LSU team is going to be loaded. It's going to be super, super talented. Um, but as always with LSU, I feel like a part of that is going to be, can they tune out the noise? Like this is obviously going to be a team with a ton of buzz around it, a ton of media attention because of everything that went down with Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss last year. So can they focus and can they actually win games, or does this become a circus like we saw the last few years under Brian Kelly?
For sure. You mentioned Indiana. I mean, yes, number one team. I'm a big proponent of a national champion should at least enter the season number one. You know, from there, they lose, get out of the way. But I feel like you earn that number one ranking until you lose if you're a national champion. A lot of key pieces coming back. Indiana does spend more money. Do we believe in them the same way with this supposed roster bulk? with Josh Hoover at quarterback?
I don't know. I don't know because Hoover is definitely prone to turnovers. That was his big problem at TCU. But also, Fernando Mendoza was entertaining at Cal, but he was nowhere near the Heisman caliber player that he evolved into. So it could be one of those scenarios where Coach Sig is just this quarterback whisperer, quarterback guru. Once they get in the room with him and his staff, they start getting, let's say, coached up a little bit better, a little bit cleaner, and minimize some of those mistakes that might have plagued them or hurt them.
Sure. And then we're going to switch teams, but stay on the quarterback. Brendan Sorsby. I don't think we can kind of avoid this given the last couple of days and the news that's come out.
Yeah.
But that's one, not overly groundbreaking for Texas Tech fans, but it's kind of groundbreaking for modern day college football as these kind of prediction markets are becoming more common. Sports betting is becoming kind of desensitized. Like we're seeing it a lot more each and every day. And then you have NIL just being still an uncharted territory, even though we are now like pretty much 5 years in, still very much like trying to figure out what's going on there. And for him to have placed thousands of bets, and I'm certain that he's not the only person in college football today that has placed bets. Now, probably that is on the higher end of bets. But nonetheless, like he's definitely not alone in that regard. And it looks like he's only bet on his team, which we would hope that if any of these kids are doing something like that, that is the case. We're not throwing games. But this is kind of a big question mark for college sports. I think that NCAA does need to hammer that down pretty quickly. That being said, whether he bet on or against his team, I don't think we see Brendan Sorsby again, right? I mean, it's just so much. That's a lot of money, a lot of bets, a lot of things going around. Not to mention, I mean, assuming he's probably placing these bets with his NIL deals.
Right.
So that's immediately, it's a whole thing. It's very unfortunate. I mean, he's looking to get the help that he needs, which is great to see at least. But I mean, for Texas Tech, you go out, you spend your money on a quarterback. Now he is almost certainly not going to be starting a single game for your program. Is Texas Tech now like, oh boy, we're hitting the panic button? Do we still think that they have a good enough defense, even though they lost a lot of pieces last year? I mean, probably not as dominant. Can we still make a Big 12 and a playoff run?
I mean, I think just because of the, let's say, investment that Texas Tech has clearly made in their program, I'm going to go with yes. Like they can be relevant in the Big 12 this year. They can be on the cusp of that playoff berth. But I think a big question for them is going to be who actually is under center. They've got that redshirt sophomore, I believe his last name's Hammond, who's coming off an ACL injury. They've got Kirk Francis, who transferred over from Tulsa. So they've got some options, got some choices in terms of who is going to be under center. And I think that is probably the biggest question for Joey McGuire is, are you going to go with probably like the safer option with a less, let's say, explosive or high ceiling and Francis, who's had game experience? You kind of know what you're getting there. Or are you going to go with a kid who's coming off an ACL tear, who could be super explosive or could really need to shake off that rust? I don't know. The Big 12 always seems to be a question mark, I feel like, when it comes to who's coming out of there. 2 years ago, it looked like Iowa State was probably the favorite in the conference, and then Arizona State gets hot out of nowhere and makes it to the CFP and gives Texas a heck of a game. Then last year, again, I think if you asked most people before the season, you would say probably either K-State or Iowa State were their favorites to win the conference. And they both lay an egg. And Texas Tech, who was right there with those teams because of, as you mentioned, that NIL spend, seizes advantage of that and kind of cakewalks to the CFP. Unfortunately for them, it probably didn't end the way they wanted down in Miami. but I don't know. I feel like because of the question mark that is the Big 12, yes, this team is still good enough to make it, even if Brennan Sorsby can't play. What are your thoughts on that, TJ?
Yeah, I think Brendan Sorsby was kind of the tipping point because I love that Texas Tech defense last season.
Hmm.
I mean, they lost a lot of players and
They
they
did.
lost an all-star in Jacob Rodriguez. I think that in a similar sense, like he was that star on the back end, and I think that he deserved more recognition for the Heisman and more recognition just as the all-around defensive player that he was. He got a good bit of it. I still think he could have gotten more. Um, I think that that defense is going to take a significant step back, and the offense probably needs to continue growing forward. And I don't see how Texas Tech will compete on the same level. I don't think they make the playoff. I think they make noise in the Big 12, but at best, the Big 12 is a two-team league. I don't think that they get more than two teams in. And to be honest, if I'm a BYU fan, I'm probably pretty happy right now. I feel
Yeah,
like BYU has the best chance to make it to the college football playoff this season, and I would not be surprised if Arizona State kind of quietly comes back. I think Kenny Dillingham is still a pretty good coach. He's still young, so he's
for
learning.
sure.
That's why we kind of see the step back season that they had last year. Albeit they did lose a lot of pieces. They lost a great running back in Cam Scatabo to the draft a year prior. So I see Arizona State kind of quietly sneak its way back. I think you're going to probably have a few more teams play more consistently throughout. Like I think Cincinnati will be better, but probably still be around the same record
Yeah,
they had last season. I think you see UCF kind of make a little bit more of a step forward. Teams like that who have been quieter. I think you could have Iowa State kind of play spoiler. I think that they're still sitting around that 6-7 win mark, even with the new head coach
probably.
there. I think they can play spoiler on a lot of these big teams. Texas Tech probably being the main one for the Cyclones. So it's unfortunate for the Red Raiders and Brendan Sorsby, but I think that he really was a home run get for them, given the portal and given where everyone else kind of landed. And it unfortunately is not going to turn out for them. So that's kind of my view on the Big 12 and what we have going on in Lubbock. So we'll dance now over to baseball, current season baseball, as we'll discuss our PAC-South podcast conference standings. And right now we have Florida State in first place. Not a crazy surprise there. I would say the larger surprise will be second and third place right now, given how streaky these teams have been. One on the upswing again, one on the downswing. UCF and Florida.
Mm.
So the Peninsula State is still maintaining the top three spots as they were the last time we discussed. But Oregon State loses out on a lot of points for not being in a conference. They're currently in fourth right now. They are just under 20 points. They are 18 points behind Florida State currently. Do we think that they have a legitimate shot in this conference? And I guess I should also ask, well, actually, I'll hold on that. So we'll get to that one later.
Okay. I'm gonna say yes, that they definitely have a legitimate shot in the conference, big picture wise, right? Because I think talent perspective, let's say, Oregon State probably is the deepest team in the conference, and I trust this Oregon State team the most to make a fairly deep run in the postseason, have a good shot at making it to Omaha, things like that. I believe at the beginning of the season, my top three for our conference were, I think I did FSU, Florida, and Oregon State. So that's looking good. But I definitely think that Oregon State can, let's say, like compete with higher end programs when they get the opportunity. You know, for us, in our case, the unfortunate thing for them is those opportunities to pick up points are pretty limited since they're not playing in a conference this year.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that does hurt them. But continuing to win games at least they're picking up points along the way, still getting points, I believe, for series wins and things like that. Just not to the same level. So I will say, yes, they are a contender, threat, however you want to phrase it, to win the conference. But I'm going to put the caveat in, assuming we are taking this tally after the postseason's concluded.
Yeah.
Realistically, based on conference points, they just can't catch up. But
Yeah. Yeah, no, this will go all the way. I mean, I also think Oregon State is a very real contender. I like their chances to actually make it to Omaha this year.
mm-hmm.
I think if they don't make it to Omaha, though, they're going to have to really rely on a team like Florida State getting bounced early in the ACC tournament and not making out of their regional. I think that if Florida State's able to either make a deep run and possibly win the ACC tournament and or make the super regionals with a respectable conference showing, I just don't think Oregon State's going to have the real estate unless they go and win the national title. Of course, national title, you're basically designed to then win the conference based on points. It's still possible you don't if you don't have a good enough regular season, but it's worth a ton and nearly statistically impossible for you not to win the conference at that point. So I like them as well, but I don't like them right now, which kind of gives a hint at our final question of the day, but there's still more answers to be had there. Second to last question and topic, I guess, of the day. You have recent surges from South Carolina, New Mexico, and Central Michigan. South Carolina, of course, making the midseason change from Paul Maneri to Monty Lee at head coach. New Mexico, kind of same thing as UCF and Florida, kind of having really streaky seasons at certain points. I do believe New Mexico at one point dropped 11 games straight and have since come back and won about 12 of their last 14. So they started one of the last 3 undefeated teams in the country to them losing 11 straight. And now we're back towards the top of Mountain West play, and Central Michigan, now that they're in MAC play, have kind of found their footing. They've actually been able to knock off a few wins and steal some series in there as well. Do we consider any of these teams contenders for the conference? Right now they sit, let me see here, 29 points and 30 points respectfully off of Florida State. Is there a real chance if we end the season right?
That's a tough question. I mean, there's always a chance, I'll say. I don't think that any of those 3 teams, South Carolina, New Mexico, or Central Michigan, have a legitimate chance at winning the conference. But I will say, if New Mexico, they're probably the team I have the most consistent faith in. If they keep it up and they can win the Mountain West, that would be huge. I think they could easily finish top 3 in the conference if that is the case. South Carolina obviously has looked a lot better under Monty Lee, but still, the question marks remain of like when this team goes up against, let's say, I don't know, Florida or Texas in the SEC tournament, what team's going to show up? They look great against Kentucky this past weekend, but even when they played in Georgia, that was kind of a Jekyll and Hyde series where there were some really great moments and then there were some really ugly moments. So I think until we get some consistency out of South Carolina baseball, I just can't trust them to make that type of jump in the standings. But I do believe that New Mexico can easily finish top 3. I don't think catch FSU, but definitely top 3.
Yeah, I did have New Mexico as one of my top 3 teams when we started the season. And I do think that if anyone is a contender of this group, it is New Mexico, just given the schedules that these teams have left and the consistency of their play. Central Michigan has the schedule for it remaining to have a chance and make a run. I just don't think they have the consistent play. I think that they really fall even further into that Jekyll and Hyde syndrome of just you really don't know what team's going to show up. And as I mentioned before, I didn't really say that they've been winning series. I said that they've been stealing series. So Chippewas are in a better place. I mean, they could possibly grow with this season, but I just don't see them doing much. South Carolina, similar thing, like you say, like they've played Kentucky and Missouri recently, and they have series wins and sweeps against the two. Those are two of the worst teams in the conference. You put them up against a Florida. Can they do that? You mentioned like the Georgia series since Monty Lee's taken over. They just still did not look any bit sound in that. So can they get any consistency against these better teams in conference play? Probably not. And the unfortunate thing for South Carolina as well, you can't really take this probably as a building season because it's highly unlikely you have Monty Lee losing the interim tag in Columbia. So that then kind of leaves New Mexico by default, but with good reason. I already mentioned a lot of them before. But that Mountain West Conference, I think, is wide open for them. I think if they continue to stay on the more consistent baseball they've been playing throughout the year, it's been good balls, been high offense. I think if they're able to do that, win the Mountain West Conference and make at least the regional final, there's a conversation to be had for the Lobos. So,
sure.
yeah, I'm with you. I think that is kind of our only real contender in that group of three. Now, on to our final bit of baseball. Who will actually win the regular season? Now, I'm not going into, how does regional, supers, and conference tournaments get into it. Just when we finish up in roughly a month, how are we going to finish up? Who's going to be our conference regular season champions?
I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to go with UCF. I think the Big 12, kind of like in football, is not exactly solidified, let's say. I think there's 3 teams. It's Kansas, Arizona State, and UCF are all tied for first in the Big 12, I'm pretty sure.
Last I saw, UCF was coming back on Arizona State, but I have not seen in a few days.
Yeah.
But that probably is at least in the ballpark.
I think it's like those 3 are all roughly around the same record in conference play. If I'm wrong, hand up, I'm wrong. But I do trust this UCF team to get hot when they need to get hot and carry momentum over the course of something like a conference tournament. Where in the ACC, obviously Florida State's been really, really good this year. But the ACC is also pretty deep. Boston College has been kind of a surprise story this year, just being super aggressive on the base paths, stealing on like literally everybody. I know that clip went viral. I guess it was probably 2 weeks ago at this point where they were stealing on Duke while they were up like 18 runs. Tough scene. But, I feel like the ACC has more of those opportunities for Florida State to stumble, where the Big 12, if UCF goes in playing consistent, good baseball and not making mental errors, I think that they win that conference tournament. Not easily, but we'll say confidently.
I hate that you went that way. I was already kind of leaning toward UCF. Even when they were on their like skids, they still made a lot of these games interesting. They've played a good bit of extra inning games. They've played a good bit of 1-run games. So I feel like they are battle tested in that regard. But since you went that way, I don't know if I can go away from Florida State.
Ooh, okay.
And it was already tough. I think Florida, I wanted to go with them a few weeks ago, but now they are just on a full skid. I don't think that they will have time to recover before the end of the regular season. Florida State is still a very good team. I think if Oregon State was in a conference, it would probably be pretty easy to say Oregon State.
Yeah.
Probably mentioned them earlier. But Florida State, really good. I mean, they are also benefiting a little bit from teams like Duke, who we thought were going to be better than they were going into the season. And in non-conference play, they kind of hit ACC play and just immediately took a nosedive. So Florida State obviously benefiting from tales like that against conference opponents. So I think that Florida State, even with a slip up here and there, we'll get it done barely.
I was gonna say like ACC. I don't know. For me, like Georgia Tech and UNC both worry me for Florida State, but
I feel like I worry more about Georgia Tech for Florida State than I do UNC.
yeah,
But I mean, all very good ball clubs and definitely higher caliber than something that UCF can really run into in the Big 12 on given weekends. I like UCF. The lead that Florida State at least has right now helps a lot in me being able to go against your decision to take my original decision. So we'll stay, roughly 3 hours apart from each other, see how everything turns out in the Sunshine State. And then we will be back again next week with our regularly scheduled recording and posting date. Thank you all so much for listening, tuning in, and following us on the billion platforms that we are now on. But until next time, we will see you all later.